Alabama has one of the least regulated tenant screening environments in the country, consistent with the state's overall landlord-friendly regulatory approach and strong property rights orientation. The governing framework includes the Alabama Uniform Residential Landlord and Tenant Act, found in Alabama Code Title 35, Chapter 9A, along with FCRA and Alabama's fair housing provisions. If you're screening tenants in Alabama, the federal FCRA and Fair Housing Act are essentially your complete screening compliance framework. The state has not enacted meaningful additional restrictions on the tenant screening process. Let's start with application fees. Alabama does not cap application fees. There is no state statute limiting what a landlord can charge for tenant screening. The Alabama Uniform Residential Landlord and Tenant Act does not address application fee amounts, procedures, or refund requirements. Landlords can charge whatever they determine is reasonable. Most Alabama landlords charge between $20 and $40 per applicant. Alabama's rental market is among the most affordable in the nation, and keeping fees proportionate to actual screening costs is both practical and professional. Charging excessive fees in a market where average rents are modest can discourage qualified applicants, particularly in smaller markets outside the major metros where the applicant pool is already limited. Criminal history screening in Alabama is completely unrestricted at the state level. Alabama does not have a ban-the-box or fair chance housing law for housing. There are no state-level restrictions preventing landlords from asking about criminal history on the initial application. Landlords can inquire about arrests and convictions, can use criminal history as a screening factor without conducting a formal individualized assessment, and are not subject to look-back period limits. No Alabama municipality has enacted local criminal history screening restrictions for housing. Birmingham, Montgomery, Huntsville, Mobile, Tuscaloosa, and every other Alabama community operate under the same completely unrestricted framework. The screening environment for criminal history is entirely uniform across the state. Alabama has provisions for expungement of certain criminal records under Alabama Code Section 1527(1) and following. Alabama expanded its expungement eligibility in recent years, allowing expungement of certain nonviolent felonies and misdemeanors after specified waiting periods and under certain conditions. Once a record is expunged under Alabama law, it is sealed from public access, and the individual is treated as if the arrest or conviction never occurred. Landlords cannot consider expunged records in screening decisions. Alabama also allows expungement of non-conviction records, including arrests that did not result in charges, dismissed charges, and acquittals. These records should be filtered from screening reports. Landlords should verify that their screening provider is current with Alabama's expanded expungement provisions. Alabama has not legalized recreational marijuana. Possession remains a criminal offense. Alabama enacted a medical marijuana program through the Darren Wesley Otto Compassion Act, but the program's implementation has been delayed. Landlords can consider marijuana possession records in screening, but should be aware that the national landscape on marijuana is evolving and that medical marijuana patients may eventually have protections similar to those in states with more established medical programs. HUD's 2016 guidance on criminal history and disparate impact applies in Alabama. Alabama has a significant African American population. Approximately 27% of the state's total population, with much higher concentrations in Birmingham, Montgomery, Selma, the Black Belt region, and other areas. Criminal history policies that disproportionately affect Black applicants face particular scrutiny under federal fair housing law. Alabama's demographics make disparate impact a relevant consideration. Blanket rejection policies that don't account for the nature, severity, and recency of offenses create federal risk. Documenting your criteria and applying them consistently is essential. Alabama's civil rights history adds context to fair housing enforcement in the state. Alabama was at the center of the civil rights movement, and federal courts and enforcement agencies have historically scrutinized housing practices in Alabama with particular attention. While this doesn't change the legal standards that apply, it means that patterns of discriminatory screening are more likely to attract federal attention in a state with Alabama's history. Source of income protection does not exist at the state level in Alabama. Landlords are not prohibited from considering the source of an applicant's income when making screening decisions. Landlords can legally decline applicants who pay with housing choice vouchers, Social Security, disability payments, or other government assistance. No Alabama municipality has enacted a local source of income protection ordinance. Participation in voucher programs is entirely voluntary. Alabama has relatively high poverty rates, and a significant portion of the rental population receives some form of government assistance. While excluding voucher holders is legally permissible, the market reality in many Alabama communities, particularly in the Black Belt, smaller cities, and lower-income neighborhoods of the major metros, is that government-assisted tenants represent a substantial portion of the available applicant pool. Many Alabama landlords find that voucher tenants provide reliable rent. The housing authority pays its portion directly and on time, and the tenant's portion is typically modest. For credit reports, Alabama follows standard FCRA requirements: permissible purpose, written consent, and adverse action notice procedures. Alabama does not impose any additional state-level requirements for credit report access, adverse action content, or notification timelines beyond the federal baseline. One practical consideration for credit screening in Alabama: the state has one of the lower median household incomes in the nation and higher than average poverty rates. Credit scores across the state's population tend to be lower than national norms, reflecting economic conditions rather than individual irresponsibility. Setting credit score thresholds calibrated to Alabama's local market conditions rather than national standards ensures you don't exclude otherwise reliable applicants. Research the specific market where your property is located and set criteria that identify genuinely high-risk applicants while remaining realistic for the local economy. Alabama's fair housing protections are found in the Alabama Fair Housing Law, Alabama Code Title 24, Chapter 8. The Act prohibits discrimination in housing based on race, color, religion, national origin, sex, disability, and familial status, mirroring the Federal Fair Housing Act. Alabama has not added additional protected categories such as sexual orientation, gender identity, marital status, age, ancestry, or source of income beyond the federal baseline. The Alabama Center for Real Estate and the Alabama Securities Commission handle certain fair housing functions, and complaints can also be filed with HUD. Alabama's fair housing enforcement relies more heavily on federal agencies than some states. HUD and the Department of Justice are the primary enforcement bodies for housing discrimination complaints in Alabama. Private causes of action under the Federal Fair Housing Act are also available. Tenants can sue landlords directly for discrimination. Fair housing organizations, including the Central Alabama Fair Housing Center and other advocacy groups, provide legal assistance and pursue fair housing cases in the state. While Alabama's state fair housing law mirrors federal protections, recent federal interpretations of sex discrimination may extend some protections based on sexual orientation and gender identity. Alabama landlords should be aware that this area of law continues to evolve at the federal level, regardless of state law. Birmingham has been the most active Alabama city on housing issues. The city has enacted various housing-related measures and has an active tenant advocacy community. While Birmingham has not enacted local screening restrictions or source of income protections, the city's political environment is more receptive to tenant protections than the state as a whole. Landlords in Birmingham should monitor local developments. From a practical standpoint, Alabama's rental market has become one of the more dynamic in the Southeast in recent years, with Huntsville's explosive growth leading the transformation, while other markets maintain their traditional character. Huntsville has emerged as one of the fastest growing cities in the South and has fundamentally changed Alabama's economic story. The economy is driven by an extraordinary concentration of aerospace, defense, and technology employment. Redstone Arsenal, home to NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center, the Army's Space and Missile Defense Command, the FBI's Operational Technology Division, and numerous other agencies, anchors an economy that has attracted billions in investment. The Mazda Toyota manufacturing plant has added further diversification. Huntsville's rental market has tightened dramatically, and landlords generally have strong pricing power. Screening in Huntsville involves a distinctive applicant pool, heavily weighted toward engineers, scientists, defense professionals, and federal civilian employees. Many of these applicants have excellent credit and income profiles, but may work in classified positions where employer verification is limited. Having a process for verifying income through pay stubs and tax returns when employer disclosure is restricted ensures you can evaluate these applicants effectively. Security clearance holders are generally excellent tenants. Their clearance depends on financial responsibility. Military tenants and defense contractors at Redstone Arsenal represent a major segment of the market. BAH rates for Huntsville reflect the area's growing cost of living and have increased as the market has tightened. Birmingham, Alabama's largest metro area, has a moderate rental market driven by healthcare, including UAB Medicine, one of the state's largest employers, financial services, engineering, legal services, and a revitalizing urban core. Birmingham's market varies significantly by neighborhood. Downtown, Lakeview, Avondale, and Highland Park have seen revitalization and strong demand. Mountain Brook and Homewood command premium suburban rents. Other parts of the metro are more affordable. Birmingham has the most active tenant advocacy community in Alabama. While the city hasn't enacted specific screening restrictions, the city's diverse population, approximately 70% African American, means that criminal history policies face heightened fair housing scrutiny. Documented, consistently applied criteria are essential for Birmingham landlords. Montgomery, the state capital, has a stable market driven by state government, Maxwell Air Force Base, healthcare, and Hyundai's manufacturing presence. Military tenants from Maxwell AFB represent a reliable segment. BAH rates for Montgomery are moderate. The broader Montgomery market is affordable with moderate demand. Mobile, Alabama's port city, has a rental market influenced by the port, Airbus's manufacturing facility, Austal USA's shipbuilding operations, healthcare, and the University of South Alabama. Mobile's aerospace and maritime industries have driven growth, and the market has strengthened. The Gulf Coast location brings hurricane risk that can temporarily affect the rental market. Tuscaloosa, home to the University of Alabama, has a tight student-driven market. The university's massive enrollment and the intensity of the college culture create strong and consistent demand. Rents near campus are high relative to the city's size. Screening student applicants with limited credit and rental history requires consistent cosigner or guarantor policies. The student market turns over annually, and landlords process high volumes of applications each spring and summer. Auburn and Opelika, home to Auburn University, have a similar student-driven dynamic. The university's growth and the broader Lee County economy have expanded rental demand. Florence, Muscle Shoals, and the Shoals area have a moderate market influenced by the University of North Alabama and regional manufacturing. Dothan, near Fort Novosel, formerly Fort Rucker, has a military-influenced market. Fort Novosel is the Army's primary aviation training center, and military tenants represent a large portion of the local rental market. BAH rates for the Dothan area are modest. Anniston, near the Anniston Army Depot, has a smaller military-influenced market. Gadsden, Decatur, and other mid-size Alabama cities have moderate to soft markets with limited pricing power. The Black Belt region, including communities in Dallas, Perry, Wilcox, Lowndes, and Marengo counties, has some of the softest rental markets in the country. Population decline, extreme poverty, and limited economic opportunity constrain demand. Landlords in Black Belt communities face the challenge of finding any qualified tenants in a very small and economically challenged applicant pool. Setting realistic screening standards is essential. Criteria that work in Huntsville or Birmingham would exclude virtually every applicant in these communities. One best practice for Alabama landlords: even though the state has essentially no screening regulation beyond federal law, develop a written screening policy documenting every criterion you apply. Specify credit score thresholds, income-to-rent ratios, rental history requirements, criminal history evaluation standards, and how you handle applicants with limited credit files. Apply those criteria to every applicant uniformly. In Alabama specifically, given the state's civil rights history and significant African American population, documented, consistently applied screening criteria are your strongest defense against a federal fair housing challenge. Another best practice: calibrate your screening criteria to your specific Alabama market. Huntsville, Birmingham, and the Black Belt have fundamentally different economic conditions and applicant pools. A credit score threshold appropriate for Huntsville's defense professional market would disqualify most applicants in Selma. An income-to-rent ratio that works in Birmingham's middle-income neighborhoods may be unrealistic for the state's poorest communities. Set standards that identify genuinely high-risk applicants while remaining realistic for the local economy where your property is located. A third best practice: verify that your screening provider is current with Alabama's expanded expungement provisions. Alabama expanded expungement eligibility in recent years, and records that have been expunged should not appear on background reports. If your provider returns expunged records, the information is unreliable, and acting on it creates risk. Ask your provider specifically about their compliance with Alabama Code Section 15-27-1 and following. For landlords in Huntsville who screen defense and intelligence community applicants, develop a process for verifying income when employer disclosure is limited. Classified position holders may not be able to have their employer confirm specific job titles or duties. Accept pay stubs, W-2 forms, and tax returns as primary income verification for these applicants. Security clearance status, if voluntarily disclosed, is actually a positive screening indicator, as clearance holders must maintain financial responsibility to retain their clearance. Alabama limits the security deposit to 1 month's rent. The deposit must be returned within 60 days of the tenant vacating, one of the longer return periods in the country. If the landlord fails to return the deposit within 60 days, the landlord may be liable for double the amount wrongfully withheld plus attorney's fees. The 1-month deposit cap makes thorough screening critical. Your financial protection against a problem tenant is limited to 1 month's rent, so getting the tenant selection right on the front end is essential. For the complete guide to Alabama tenant screening laws, visit tenantscreeningbackgroundcheck.com. Subscribe to our channel for every state in our tenant screening law series.